It gives me immense pleasure to welcome our very own Rotarians, past President Shailesh Haribhakti and Rotarian Anil Harish. We look forward to hearing from you about the reflections on the budget 2022. And since you don't need any introduction, we'll get started right away. So once again, neither of the speakers need any introduction. Anil, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. President Shahnaz, Shailesh Haribhakti, fellow Rotarians and friends. The Finance Minister was commended for brevity in presenting the budget speech. It was shorter than it has been in the last few years. In the course of her speech, she talked about 13 different tax proposals, the amendments that she proposed to the Income Tax Act. And then in para 138 of her speech, she said there are a few more amendments. So one would have thought there would be a total of about 20 or 25 or something like that. But when you look into the finance bill, you find that there are as many as 83 clauses to amend the Income Tax Act. And from the time that she has become the finance minister from 2019, so in these 4 years, there is a total of 425 clauses to amend the Income Tax Act. That's a huge number. Every year, and this year as well, she has stated that the objectives of the amendments to the Income Tax Act are to rationalize and to make it easier for assessees and to simplify. But when you have 425 amendments, it's surely not making it easier for any assessee to have to keep up with all these rapid changes that come. And it shows that everything was not rational at all. And that there are so many changes that are being made because every year they talk about rationalization as an objective. It cannot be that the Income Tax Act was so irrational that it needed 425 changes. So you can see that many of the changes that they're proposing now themselves don't really make very much sense. Now, apart from them classifying these into different categories, such as those which are to rationalize and those which are to simplify and to simplify for assessees, they have not created one classification, which I think that they should have, especially this year. Every year we find that there are some retrospective amendments, and this year they've really gone overboard. There are as many as 18 retrospective amendments out of 83 clauses. So you can see what that means. If an assessee makes a mistake, then the assessee is taxed and penalized and will be prosecuted. But the Income Tax Department makes a mistake, or the Finance Minister makes a mistake, then all that they do is amend the law, and that also retrospectively. In fact, one of the amendments goes back to as far back as 2005. There are several others which are of more recent years, but there are several which amend the Income Tax Act with retrospective effect from 2021. So they introduced the amendments last year. They didn't think about them properly, and now this year they're amending them with retrospective effect from last year. Now, that's not the kind of simplicity and the rationality that we need or that we expect from a government. In fact, in the memorandum explaining the provisions of the finance bill, they have themselves referred in some places to inadvertent errors. At least that is one thing good that they have done, that they've admitted their mistakes. But we don't want them to make mistakes. And if they do, then they should be very few. And they should also understand that assessees too can make mistakes, and they should be much more forgiving in those cases. One of the things that they've talked about is simplicity. There are as many as 8 different rates of surcharge, and they've amended some of the classifications of income to go from a 37% surcharge level to a 15% surcharge level. There is no rationale given for this. It doesn't say why 37% was wrong, why 15% is right, what is the great thing that is sought to be achieved by this, what is going to be the revenue implication of all these things. They just say to simplify and rationalize. But when there are 8 different rates of surcharge, 2%, 5%, 7%, 10%, 12%, 15%, 25%, 37%, it just doesn't make sense at all. Life could be so much simpler, and we do definitely need a much simpler Income Tax Act than the one that we have now. One of the amendments that they have talked of a great deal is the updated return concept. Now, already there is in the Income Tax Act the concept of a revised return. That if you file an income tax return, then in the past you had 2 years' time within which to revise it. They reduced the time and said it can be done within a year. Now they say that a return has to be revised only up to 31st December of that assessment year. So suppose the year ends on 31st March 22, then you would be able to file a revised return by 31st December 22. So if you make a mistake, yes, you can correct it. Now they say that if you have made a mistake beyond and you find out about it or you realize that mistake a little bit later, then you can file what is called not a revised return, but an updated return within 1 year from the end of the assessment year. And in such a case, you will pay the additional tax, of course, because you found out an error. But in addition to the additional tax and the interest thereon, you'll have to pay 25% more. So suppose you find that you had made an error and that the tax amount comes to 10 lakhs of rupees and the interest because of the delayed payment of tax comes to 2 lakhs, so that's 12 lakhs of rupees. They say you pay this 10 plus 2, but you also pay 25% of this 12 lakhs. That means another 3 lakhs of rupees because you made an error. And in the event you realize this error in the second year, that means within 2 years from the end of the assessment year, then you'll have to pay this 12 lakhs of rupees plus 50% additional. So that means you'd have to pay 12 plus 6, 18 lakhs of rupees because you made an error. You found it out yourself. They have not found out. You're surrendering it yourself and you're offering it for tax voluntarily, but still you have to pay this. What if you find an error that had gone against you and you now want to correct it and you want to get a refund or you want to pay a little lower rate of tax because there are so many judgments of the courts, you may come across a judgment which now is in your favor and therefore you want to revise the return or update your return, as they say. Can you do that? Sorry, not allowed. If you want to pay to the government, pay plus pay this 25% extra or the 50% extra. But if you find that you had committed an error and that you now are entitled to something more, you're just not allowed to do it. Your time had already stopped at the end of the assessment year. So that's really unfair. It creates so many problems for SSEs, and the government also keeps coming out with amendments. The courts take so many years. There are many cases where SSEs say that, well, we took a particular stand, maybe the Supreme Court has now decided in our favor, I want to file a revised return, or the tribunal has decided on a similar issue, I want to file a revised return or an updated return, but you can't do it if you're going to get a benefit. So I think it's extremely one-sided and very unfair. I will just talk about one or two other amendments. One is this, that if you take a loan, as many businesses have to take, then the income tax officer can ask you to prove the source of your loan. He can say, I want to know the identity of the lender, the capacity of the lender, and the genuineness of the transaction, because he presumes that it is your own black money that had gone to the lender and he's given it back to you. Now, the Supreme Court laid down these tests of identity, capacity, and genuineness many years ago, and this has been the law up to now. But now they say, no, that's not enough. We want to do something more. You have to prove the source of your source. So not only do you have to get the identity of your lender, which you will know, you will have his PAN card, etc. You'll know from what bank account he's given it. You'll be able to say that I borrowed 20 lakhs of rupees from him, and he seems to be a person who is of that substance. He lives here in Bombay. He has an office in Bombay. He seems to be doing a business. It's not for me to go and investigate, but I can tell you that he appears to be genuine and that my transaction is correct. I've been borrowing in the course of business. I need money for my business. So therefore, I've taken a loan from him and I'm paying interest to him. But no, you have to now prove that he had enough money. So you have to ask him for his bank account details. He has to show you how he got that 20 lakhs of rupees which he gave to you. Now, he may say, I'm not going to tell you. Why should I? You're not my investigating officer. But if you do not prove that information, if you do not prove the source of your source, then the implication comes upon you and you get taxed. The ITO says that you have not proved the genuineness of your loan. Now, till now, the Supreme Court used to say that once you have established the burden of showing who the identity, capacity, and genuineness, then it's for the income tax officer to look into the other person's case and see whether he had really deposited his own black money and then given it to you, etc. But no, now the burden falls upon you. So every business which borrows money can be affected in this way if the borrowings are from private parties. And you don't always get from banks or even from strong NBFCs. You may get from individuals, from friends, but you will have to prove all that. Now, there are, of course, some benefits. It's not only that the amendments are contrary to the assessees, but there are some benefits. For instance, one of them is that new manufacturing companies can be set up now, not only by 2023, but by 2024. And such a manufacturing company will have to pay tax only at a rate of 15%. So it's good, some assessees will be helped. But my question is, why do we have this kind of discrimination? On the one hand, the government says every year, and they've said again this year, that we want to have a level playing field, that we do not want to have unnecessary exemptions. But then they are the ones who create these exemptions. There's one category of assessee, a new manufacturing company, which will pay tax at 15%. An individual may have to pay tax at 42.744%. Why should there be such a disparity? And what have they done to all those who suffered during the COVID times? What about all the MSMEs? Many of them are proprietary concerns or partnership firms. Why should they not be given a benefit? An individual may not set up a company, he may have a small manufacturing entity, but he'll have to start paying tax at the rate of 35% the moment his income crosses 10 lakhs of rupees, whereas a company would get to pay tax only at 15%. So I think that this is also very discriminatory. There should be a level playing field, and they should not give benefits only to certain classes of assessees. As for instance, they've again done to the gift city in Gujarat. Every year, the gift city gets more and more exemptions. Aren't we all deserving of that? We've all worked all our lives. We've earned, we've contributed, we've paid so much tax, and yet we are just ignored and we are discriminated against. So I feel that there is now real need for rationalization, for simplification, and for stability. We do not want these 425 changes in 4 years, and everything should be very smooth and stable. Now, in addition to the provisions relating to the tax laws, there are some things that are important, because when we talk of the budget is not merely the income tax, it's actually the allocation of expenses, the allocation of expenditure of resources, and raising of those resources. Partly it's from tax and partly it's from other sources. Now, one thing that was done, which was good in this year, was that Air India was disinvested. Last year, I was very skeptical because for 20 years, they've been talking about selling off Air India. This year, they have sold it. On 27 January, they handed over, and the government has got 17,000 crores of rupees. They had budgeted to get 1,75,000 crores from disinvestments in this financial year. They got only 78,000 crores. And for the coming year, they have said that they expect to get about 65,000 crores. All very nice figures, which they are very large for an individual and for a country. And I'm glad that something has been done, but a lot more remains to be done. But the figures that the government gives are quite often off the mark. Last year, they referred to a fiscal deficit. This year, it's higher than they estimated it would be. Then the total expenditure was estimated to be at 34.83 lakh crores. But in fact, the revised estimates are that it will be 37.7 lakh crores. That means there's a difference of 10%. Assessees are not allowed to make any mistakes at all, but the government with its army of statisticians can make these mistakes, and there's no consequence at all. They have talked about some plans for the future. As of now, these are plans, and we hope that these fructify. For instance, they've talked about having 25,000 kilometers of roadways in this year. They've talked about a high level of urban planning. They want to improve the mega cities and the tier 1 and tier 2 cities. We hope that all that is done. But nothing has been done, as I said, for MSMEs. Nothing has been done for hotels and tourism, many of the sectors that we know have suffered. So I will conclude by saying this. that one, I feel that we definitely need a new Income Tax Act, which is then not changed from year to year, which should be stable and which should have stable rates and which should be rational. And the second thing that I would say is that every year the finance minister must submit a report card. She must say, last year, this is what I said we would do, that we would disinvest this much, this is the amount of expenditure, this would be the amount of fiscal deficit, this is how we would curb litigation, this is how we would improve housing, these are the sectors we would improve. And this is our report card, this is what we have done, this is what we have not done. We will find, unfortunately, in many of the years that the government has failed miserably on many of these counts. We hope that they change, but we definitely do want a report card so that that's a proper basis for the future. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great, Anil. Anil, let me start by saying that I'm going to come to your office in the next few days and present to you a 10-page amended Income Tax Act, which I had through a very large team at the Indian Merchants Chamber put together 17 years ago. But please advocate that India now needs this 10-page Income Tax Act, which will create a tsunami of incremental voluntary tax payments, as we have seen has already happened in the last few years. So, Anil, please, you'll have to offer me a good cup of coffee, across which I will give you this 10-page Income Tax Act.
I wish we could offer you finance ministership.
But Anil, I'm so keen that this simplicity and all of this happens. But I'm going to take a very different cut of the finance minister's statement, and I'm going to craft it in terms of the 6 forces that we should expect will drive our decision making over the next year. The first big force is going to be the force of capital investment by the government. 10 lakh plus crores have been committed to be spent on CapEx. If we take the central government's commitments and the state government's commitments together, the multiplier effect that a capital expenditure can actually have is phenomenal in terms of the wages it will generate, the contracts it will generate, the quantum of new capability that it will generate, if it is well directed. And let us look at where these 10 lakhs are meant to be spent. And I'll give you just 3 or 4 buckets. I would miss a few because I'm just trying to generalize and give a flavor for what's being done. The first big bucket is what is called Gati Shakti. And the reason why Gati Shakti is very important for India is because the biggest reason why we are globally uncompetitive is that our logistics costs in India are absolutely out of whack with what they are in the advanced economies of the world. And therefore, we need roads, we need last mile connectivity, we need ports, we need linking of rivers, we need ropeways, we need every way that we can move goods from one place to another faster than what we are able to do today. So Gati Shakti, speed enablement, is going to receive a big chunk of this 10 lakhs. And I would say approximately 25%. The other big bucket is rural India. And what is sought to be done there is to, one, make sure that rural India is empowered to face years in which the monsoon may not actually prove to be as good as it supposed to be. And so there is investment in completing irrigation projects, and there is investment to make sure that land gets the resource activation that it needs to make sure that the land records are digitized at scale. This is the first budget where now there's an explicit commitment to remove this whole old curse, I would say, of Benamidar land. And if we are able to get that, and we are able to move goods from the fruit trees which are planted and from all the produce that we can get from agriculture, we should see significant change. Third big bucket is Digital India, which means that we will have, of course, these 75 district places which will have digital banks, 75 digital banks being established in district towns. We will have last mile connectivity of internet to the remotest parts of our country. We will have the ability to make sure that water flows to homes at scale. We'll have the ability to make sure that affordable homes actually get built in the rural areas. And the fourth big bucket is energy transition. So all kinds of energy transitions are being planned so that we can finally, over maybe next 10 years, get rid of the biggest elephant in our room, which is imported inflation through oil prices. That continues to be the biggest elephant in this budget, which will change the whole actual versus planned scope of this very interesting statement that the finance minister gave us. So that's the first big force that is being unleashed. Will it crowd in capital investment from the private sector? I don't know. But here's what I wrote to the Financial Times this morning. I said, the PLI scheme will certainly catalyze private investment into areas such as semiconductors, into areas such as textiles, pharma, APIs, which we were not producing and had become almost prisoners to China for our supply. So PLI will deliver private sector investment. The other area where private sector investment is happening at scale, and I'm seeing this everywhere, is again in energy transition, but more importantly in complete digitalization and robotization and moving towards manufacturing 4.0. Even this morning at a board meeting, we discussed the absolute crying need to make sure that India can move to manufacturing 4.0. Because in the long run, all supply chains are going to get nearshored. And we will have to learn to do 3D printed manufacturing at scale and of quality in a way that we can democratize the cost, become competitive, and actually make a difference. So that's the second force. The third force that I see getting unleashed is really the non-dependence on global supply chains, particularly because the shipping costs have gone up so dramatically that to import goods and have the worry that what you need as imported components will not reach you in order for you to manufacture will get cut off. And therefore, it has become so important to empower our industry to make sure that they will keep producing at scale from raw materials which are available near shore, innovate. 3 sub-forces that will be unleashed should be innovation, digitalization, and most importantly, being sustainable. So if these 3 soft forces are unleashed, that will be a very big accomplishment. The fourth force that I would point out is reaching fiscal rectitude without sacrificing allocations to needy sectors. And why do I say that that's an important force? We had a fiscal responsibility bill which wanted us to reach 3% fiscal deficit. In the COVID year, we completely were not able to control the fiscal deficit. This year, we will end up at perhaps 6.8 to 7. We don't know. The final numbers will be known only sometime in April, May this year. Next year, we are on a glide path to 0.5% reduction, and we have seen the movement towards 4.5% fiscal deficit. This is a very strong signal that please don't anticipate inflation, because we are not going to release money at a scale which will destroy the balance between the forces of demand and supply. The fifth force that has been unleashed is the force of the digital currency, the central bank digital currency. But even more important is the recognition of a virtual digital asset as an asset class. Of course, it's going to be taxed heavily if you sell it. But the fact that you can own it and you can make a profit from it virtually legitimizes the ownership of a virtual digital asset, which could be in the shape of an NFT, it could be a Bitcoin, it could be any of the other coins, it could be a coin exchange, it could be investment in blockchain, it could take so many different forms. So that's the fifth, digital currency. You know, all of us will not feel comfortable using cash. Now, that's a very huge transformation that has happened. I mean, all of us have experienced it. Our children at first stopped using a pen because everything was kind of entered into a computer. Now they'll stop having a wallet. And this is going to be the delivery of the digital currency that we will have. And finally, what has been done is that the macro environment that gives us the shelter to do all of this interaction between all the economic players is sought to be kept stable. So what do we have as a delivered result? Or what is the promise of this budget? What is the budget promise? It says we will have the fastest growing nation on earth. That's the first assertion of the budget, for all the reasons we discussed. Two, it says that our deficit on current account will be kept under some control. And in terms of balance of payments, we will keep our currency as strong as we can. Three, we will keep inflation between 4 and 6%, despite all the black swan events that are happening around us, including a large taper tantrum that will arise very soon. US has already signaled that rates will rise dramatically, and everybody has decided that this gravy train of printing money cannot go on forever. But so that's the other macro that they are saying we will tackle. And they're saying that we will keep the debt to GDP ratio at approximately 60%, which is the safe level that economists across the world reckon. Just for comparison's sake, Japan is close to 250% of GDP. Japan, which is the most indebted country in the world, most indebted. And so these are what are supposed to be the outcomes of this budget. But as Anil very rightly warned, let there be a budget versus actual report next year to see whether all of these promises which are implicit in this budget are actually fulfilled. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure whether Anil wants to respond to that, or whether you all want to debate it a little more, or whether we should go to questions. But one thing is for sure, there's a super optimistic view And then there's a little more measured view from Anil. So I've had a question, Shailesh. Have
Yes.
we done a report card of last year? You know, they had promised an extremely growth-oriented budget. Were we able to see any of those things actually happen?
Shana's, the economic survey of the last 2 years is really supposed to be the government's report card. So those of us who read, it's a very, very dense and difficult document to consume. But those of us who read it will get a sense of what is truly happening on the ground level in terms of whether investments have reached, last mile has happened, people have received Manrega money, whether people have started spending, and we all start feeling in industry as to whether rural demand is up or down, whether urban demand is up or down. We get that sense because of our interactions. But if there's one report of budget versus actual, it comes through the economic survey, which is supposed to talk about what happened to the monies that were allocated in the previous year.
Okay, so the answer is that yes, we have partially achieved it, or?
No, very much. The fiscal, monetary, and overall policy direction that we have launched is delivering results. We have had, despite COVID, the recovery is far faster than any of us imagined. It's, of course, a K-shaped recovery. And as Anil pointed out, the MSME and the industries which were contact-based services have actually gone into deep slumber and deep coma. And they will need to be revived through very major stimuluses.
So that has not been given.
That is not given. There's no visible stimulus that has been given, but we must not forget the fact that this is what is called the barbell strategy, that you go to where the puck you expect to be. Don't chase the puck. So if you can't predict what will happen, right? But you should have the gunpowder and you should have the ammunition to go and make sure that you can make the interventions if a situation so arises. That's the capacity that the government of India has built up. And that's why conservatism in numbers has been quite remarkable in this budget.
Okay, thank you. So we have a host of questions. Let's start. Jagdish, you have a question. Do you want to ask anybody in particular?
Yeah, I think thanks, Shani. I'll largely address it to Shailesh. I think Shailesh, you should become the brand ambassador of this great government. But anyway, along the lines of this report card, Anil talked about it. Just a couple of glaring things which certainly strike me as a lot of tall talk. I mean, 1,75,000 crores was the divestment/privatization target. We are just about actually in the bag. I think it's some 20,000 or something.
No, it's exactly 12,600 crores.
Okay, worse than I
balance is going to come from LIC.
Exactly. So 78,000 is going to happen. Frankly, it's with a nod and a wink. LIC is an IPO. It's not really privatization by any stretch of imagination. So let's say we'll just about make 78,000 with the smoke and mirror stuff. Suddenly we're told now next year 65,000 after having been 175,000 the previous year. No explanation what's happening to BPCL, Concor, SCI that we were promised, no details whatsoever. So again, complete sort of smoke and mirrors on that. Frankly, we need a dynamic minister. And by the way, if a private sector person had to say, I'll do 175 rupees of sales and I do 78, that too with some, jiggery pokery, he should be out on his, what. But, of course, nothing. You've got a DPAM secretary and Babu talk and all this kind of stuff. You need a minister like Suri.
Just to respond to that for a second, we must not forget that this asset monetization is a thing that has not been mentioned in the entire finance minister's speech. And when she was asked later on as to why she didn't mention it, she said, I don't know what will be up for sale and which asset will be available for monetization.
No, Shailesh,
So we have not
that is my second point I was going to come to. No, I beg to differ. I think the 65,000 is, she's referring to all this divestment / IPO, LIC type of thing. The second point which I was going to ask you, a couple of years ago, I think, I don't remember which budget, we talked about 6 lakh crores, 600,000 crores of this asset monetization that you're talking about, land along railways, ports, etc., etc. That's suddenly now
in
sorry?
10 years.
10 years, but where is, I mean, 3 years, 2 years have elapsed of that. Not a ball has been bowled as far as I can see. Where is the single, and there's no talk in this budget about that.
Yeah. So, Jagdish, I'll tell you two things. One, the most attractive debt asset that you will want your friends to have will be the asset monetization proceeds. I can tell you that from personal experience. The first debt asset monetization paper that came out is extremely attractive. It will deliver a return of 7 to 7.5% with a possible cap gain of another 1%.
अभी तो 2-3 साल हवा में है ना. My point is,
I'm talking about paper.
And the third, last quick one is this business. I don't know if you two worthy gentlemen approve of this thing, continuing to add import duty tariffs. This whole Atmanirbharta, of course, that gets at the root of the whole program of the great government. Are we heading for this protectionist world when the world is opening up? We're avoiding all these international treaties like the RCA, whatever it's called, the Pacific one, etc. I mean, how are we going to get more competitive with the Bangladeshis and the Vietnams of the world?
Publicly against customs duties. Completely against. I want to see free trade in goods and services. That is my public.
That's not what this great finance minister and the government is doing. We are making it nice and rosy for the, the obvious names of the world in steel, etc. I mean, that's not the way a competitive Bangladesh is having garments with 50,000 workers. The ladies are getting employed, etc. What are we doing? So anyway. That's about it.
I don't want to defend because philosophically I believe in a free world.
I think there's a question from Mayank. Mayank, would you like to ask a question?
Comment and a question. Shailesh, I fully agree with your take on the macro and the India story as a whole. I am fully subscribed to the India story. However, taking up from where Anil, what he said, and it's very evident not only in the finance bill, but every step, every day you are reading, and I am encountering many such steps of the government, is that we are fully back to Inspector Raj, Babu Raj, and private sector, a businessman chore hai. So how are we going to address this dichotomy, and how is this bird going to fly and the sone ki chidiya become a sone ki chidiya if it is going to be put in a pinjara which is smaller than its own size?
Anil, why don't you answer that? Because, there's a big debate there.
Actually, I agree, because it is just so depressing every day to see these notices that come. Just now, just a few minutes before we began this discussion, a person came to me and said that a flat had been sold in the year 2012. Now a notice of reopening has been received, even though all queries have been answered twice before, and they're looking into the normal things. They're saying that, why have you paid transfer fees? Every building charges a transfer fee, so you pay it. But they say, no, it's illegal, therefore we'll only allow you a deduction of 25,000 rupees. Now the poor assessee would have to pay tax now after 10 years, and would have to pay interest and all that for doing something which is in the normal course. Practically every building charges transfer fees. There are very few which don't in this side of town. And then they said that the 1981 value should be, the SSC estimated it at 25 lakhs of rupees. In 1981, it was a 2,500 square foot flat, 1,000 rupees a square foot. The officer says, because you bought it as a tenanted flat, therefore you should pay, your base should be 1 lakh of rupees. Now, even if you bought it as a tenanted flat, the point is that in 1981, which was the step up date, you have to work out the value. Now, these are such basic things. We've done it hundreds and thousands of times before, but they still keep on reopening this. It is so depressing. Shobha and I discuss this every day. We sit with each other and, we just feel so sorry for all SSCs and for ourselves in our capacity as SSCs and those who have to defend SSCs, because it is terrible. There's everything that they do, even this updated return concept that they talk about. They say that you cannot file an updated return, even if you want to offer something more and you want to pay that additional tax. You cannot do it if any notice of if your proceedings are going on, or if a notice has been issued under this act or under that act. But the point is that you should be able to finish matters, even if a notice has been issued. So what? Just address the issue and close the matter. We just prolong litigation. They say they want to cut the High Court litigation or the tribunal litigation, but the process itself is so long-winded that if I were to receive such a notice, I'd say, no, just go ahead and do it right now. I don't want you to go through this new long process. It is really back to Inspector Raj, when the income tax rates were down to 30% in Mr. Chidambaram's time in 1997. That was wonderful. Now we've added all these surcharges and cesses and so many complications and retrospective amendments. I think that it's not a good situation. I'll just tell you one thing. A person came to me. He's a non-resident, and he had received these ridiculous notices here. He had not done anything wrong, but he had all these old inquiries. So he came to me, and after everything was over, and he said, Anil, I'm never going to do any business in India again, but in my next life, if I come back to you and I want to start a new business, please tell me not to do it in India.
Oh God, that's so unfortunate.
Is that?
I understand, Shailesh, that you are on a tight schedule and you need to leave. So I'll have to ask Akshay to start with the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Shani, and thank you, Rotarian Shailesh and Rotarian Anil. I think it was a very interesting sort of talk and definitely a debate. Personally, I think ease of doing business is still far away for us in India, and I hope that that can change over a period of time. I also want to thank you not just for this wonderful talk today, but also for bringing so many of our old Rotarians out of the woodwork and getting them to today. We had many faces that I haven't seen in a long time. We had a total of 75 members today. And I hope that the attendance will continue next week onwards when we go offline and get back to physical meetings next Tuesday at the Taj. Look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much. This meeting is now closed.